You aren't actually lazy. Your brain is just stuck in a survival loop from 10,000 years ago. Evolutionary biology has hardwired your mind to hoard energy, mistaking your modern career goals for a life-threatening risk. It's time to stop fighting your biology and start hacking the neural triggers that turn your exhaustion into high-performance power. Let me paint a picture you might recognize. You have a goal, a real one, not a vague wish that floats around your head on holidays, but something that feels urgent, something that feels like yours. Maybe it's finishing the first chapter of something you've been writing in your mind for 2 years. Maybe it's launching the thing you've described to friends over dinner so many times that you've started lowering your voice when you say it because you're tired of hearing yourself not do it. Maybe it's a degree, a pivot, a project, a phone call you keep rehearsing but never making. You sit down. The conditions are almost right. You have the time. You have the intention. You might even have a plan. And then nothing happens. Not nothing in an empty sense. You're busy. You clean something, check something, scroll something, reorganize something that didn't need reorganizing. You move with great efficiency toward everything except the one thing. And by the time the window is closed, you feel a very specific kind of tired. Not the tired you feel after hard work, the tired you feel after avoiding it. Here is what society has said about that person, about you in that moment. You lack discipline. You're self-sabotaging. You don't want it badly enough. You need a stricter routine, better habits, a wake-up time printed on a card above your desk. But I want to suggest something different. I want to suggest that this behavior isn't a character flaw or a productivity failure. It's a signal. And like most signals, it's been profoundly misread. The word procrastination carries a kind of moral weight in our culture, as if delay were a confession. We have built an entire industry around curing it. Apps, systems, coaches, challenges, 21-day programs with satisfaction guarantees. And still, the people who buy those programs the fastest, who consume that content the most eagerly, tend to be the same people who want the most from their lives. That's not a coincidence. That's a clue. The common stereotype of a procrastinator is someone indifferent, a person who doesn't care enough to begin. But research in behavioral psychology tells a different story entirely, and it's one that changes the conversation the moment you hear it. Studies consistently show that procrastination is most prevalent among people with high standards for their own work. It lives most comfortably in minds that care deeply about outcome, people who have a complex emotional relationship with failure, people for whom the work carries personal meaning. Dr. Fuschia Sirois at the University of Sheffield has spent years studying this, and what she and others have found is that procrastination isn't primarily a time management problem, it's an emotion regulation problem. The delay isn't about the task, it's about what the task represents and the feelings that come with facing it. Why does that matter? Because if you've been trying to fix a time problem that is actually an emotion problem, you have been using the wrong tools. That's not a failure of will, that's a failure of diagnosis. So let's look at what's actually happening in the brain, and let's do it without the clinical distance that usually makes this conversation feel irrelevant to your Tuesday afternoon. Imagine your brain has two systems running simultaneously. One is ancient, genuinely prehistoric. It was built to conserve energy, detect threats, and keep you alive in an environment where survival required you to move only when movement was worth the risk. This system is fast, reflexive, and deeply resistant to anything that feels uncertain. Neuroscientists call the core of this system the limbic region, but you know it by a simpler name, that feeling in your stomach when something matters too much. The other system is newer, evolutionarily speaking, barely out of the box. It lives in the prefrontal cortex, and it's the part of you that can think 10 years ahead, hold a vision, delay gratification, reason through consequences. It's where ambition lives. It's where the version of yourself you're trying to build has taken up residence. Here's the problem. These two systems do not communicate well under pressure. When the ancient system perceives threat, and it reads uncertainty, judgment, failure, and even the weight of a meaningful goal as threats. It floods the body with cortisol and pulls resources away from the prefrontal cortex. Your capacity for clear thinking, for creative problem solving, for starting the hard thing literally diminishes, not metaphorically, measurably. So, the very moment you sit down to do the work that matters most to you, your brain is most likely to go offline. And then you blame yourself for not being stronger, when in fact, you are fighting a neurological current that runs deeper than willpower. Lincoln once wrote that he did not like a man who had only one way to spell a word. There's something in that, an appreciation for complexity, for the idea that simple explanations applied to complicated things tend to produce the wrong result. We have applied the simplest possible explanation to procrastination, and in doing so, we have made it worse. Now, I want to ask you something, and I mean it as a genuine question rather than a rhetorical device. When you imagine yourself doing the work, really doing it, completing it, putting it into the world, what comes immediately after the excitement? If you sit quietly with that image for a moment, what emotion follows?
For many people, the answer isn't neutral. There's something sharp underneath the ambition. Maybe it's the fear that it won't be good enough. Maybe it's the fear that it will be good enough and then something will be expected of you that you're not sure you can sustain. Maybe it's the older, quieter fear that wanting things is somehow presumptuous, that aiming high is an invitation for a specific kind of disappointment. These aren't irrational fears. They're fears that have been learned, and your brain, trying its ancient best to protect you, interprets them as stop signs. The psychologist Adam Grant describes high-achieving procrastinators, he calls them precrastinators in reverse, as people whose delay is often incubatory rather than avoidant. Their pauses contain processing. Their withdrawal contains rehearsal. This doesn't mean all delay is productive, but it means that the person who appears to be doing nothing is often doing something, internally, invisibly, without being able to explain or defend it. Da Vinci left dozens of projects unfinished. We talk about the ones he completed. But his notebooks, those thousands of pages of ideas that veered in every direction without resolution, suggest a mind that couldn't stop asking questions long enough to be satisfied with answers. Was he undisciplined, or was he operating at a frequency that the tasks available to him couldn't quite match? I'm not suggesting you're Leonardo, but I am suggesting that the gap between what you want and what you're currently doing might not be a gap of laziness. It might be a gap of alignment. There is a concept in psychology called self-discrepancy theory, developed by E. Torrey Higgins, which describes the tension between who you are, who you think you should be, and who you ideally want to become. The distance between those selves creates what Higgins called agitation on one end and dejection on the other. Agitation when you feel you're falling short of obligation, dejection when you feel you're falling short of your own hope. Most people who struggle with doing the work they care about are living in that space between hope and reality. And the brain's response to that space is not always to charge forward. Sometimes it's to retreat to something manageable, something completable, something that at least produces the small neurochemical reward of a finished loop. You clean the kitchen because the kitchen can be finished. The project cannot, not yet. And a brain in distress prefers finished things. Understanding this doesn't excuse avoidance, but it makes it possible to meet yourself honestly instead of harshly. And honest, it turns out, is where most real change begins. Here is where I want to gently ask you to look inward, not with analysis, but with curiosity. Think about the last time you procrastinated on something meaningful, not a chore you were avoiding out of boredom, but something attached to a goal you actually care about. And instead of asking why you didn't do it, ask what you were protecting yourself from, not to justify the avoidance, but to understand it. What were you not ready to face? What outcome, positive or negative, felt too large to walk toward that day? You don't need to answer that here, and you don't need to solve it. But the act of asking that question, of treating your own behavior as information rather than evidence against yourself, is a different kind of starting point. It's a more honest one. and honesty about internal weather is the only real foundation for changing it. The distinction worth drawing is between avoidance as a pattern and withdrawal as a pause. One is a wall, the other is a breath. The difference is whether you're moving away from something out of fear you can't name, or whether you're giving yourself what you genuinely need before you can move forward. Most people know, if they're quiet for long enough, which one it is. I want to reframe something before we close, because I think it's the most important thing this video can offer you. We live in a culture that treats self-improvement as the highest virtue. Fix your routine, optimize your output, close the gap between your potential and your performance. And none of that is wrong exactly, but it has produced a generation of people who are deeply fluent in their own failures and largely illiterate about their own depth. The person who wants more from life and struggles to act on that wanting is not, in most cases, a person whose drive lacks drive. They're a person whose drive has outpaced their belief in their own readiness. And the solution to that is not a better productivity system, it is self-awareness. Real, patient, unglamorous self-awareness. The kind that doesn't ask you to be better, but asks you to be honest. When you understand why you stop being stopped by it the same way. Not at once, not permanently, but you begin to see the pattern as pattern, not as identity. And that is a meaningful distance to travel. The goal is not to become someone who never hesitates. Hesitation in the right moments is intelligence. The goal is to become someone who can tell the difference between hesitation that protects you and hesitation that shrinks you. One serves your future, one borrows from it. Here is the simple truth I want to leave you with. You are not fighting laziness. You are navigating a brain that was built for a world that no longer exists, carrying ambitions that world never anticipated. That is not a small thing to manage. That is not a character flaw. That is a genuinely difficult act of being human and wanting something. The gap between who you are and who you want to be is not proof that you're falling behind. It's proof that you're still reaching. Keep reaching. Just know what you're reaching past. If this raised more questions than it answered, good, that's the point. In the next video, we're going to look at what actually happens when you start anyway, before you feel ready, before the fear passes, before the conditions are perfect. Because the starting, it turns out, changes the feeling more than the feeling changes the starting. That's worth understanding. I'll see you there.